So I've been thinking about this for about 3 days. Let me tell you the purpose of this video. I'm not sure how long it's going to be. I have no idea. The whole point of this video is it has to actually be under 36 minutes, whether I like it or not. The purpose of this video is for anyone who loves deep thought, who wants to think deeply about theological matters, and doesn't want to do a lot of heavy lifting. You'd rather listen to somebody else do it. Just use this as a podcast and enjoy it. Like I said, I've been thinking about this for 3 days. It just came to me the other day, and I've just been contemplating it. And I think now I'm ready to speak concisely about it, hopefully, and won't spend too much time meandering on, tertiary details and so forth. So I have, we're also going to get a star-studded episode. Zany Professor is going to be making an appearance. He's going to he's made his way back from Davos and is ready to talk about a little theology. Well, he's ready to do some biblical hermeneutics here. So that should be a really tough passage. Heck, if you want to prepare, it's Matthew 27, starting in verse 51, and maybe going all the way down to 54. If you've ever read these passages, you'll know why it's just a few passages, because it's tough to interpret, but it's fascinating. So that'll be the ending, but let's begin at the beginning. I have been reading, I went on a retreat. Oh, by the way, no dog yet. Really want a dog, bad, but we still have coffee. Coffee, no dog. Went on a retreat a few months ago, and I listened to this author. His name's Jeffrey Zwirink. Sorry if I probably messed that up. He's an astrophysicist who's making a case for the multiverse, for Christian theology in the multiverse. Now, if you don't know what the multiverse is the idea. It's more complex than we really know. We think the multiverse means multiple universes. It's not that simple, but that's basically what it means. And for some, it's a little bit scary, because the idea is, well, if there's a bunch of universes that can spawn eventually our universe, then it would mean that some of the elements that seem finely tuned for our universe can be explained by an infinite number of universes. Eventually, you'd have to have a universe like ours, which would house life. Now, if that doesn't make sense, just put it this way. At the Big Bang, right before, I guess, that process of inflation, there were 6 numbers. And these 6 numbers made it possible for life. I know it's mysterious. I know it's interesting. I wish I could tell you more, but I don't fully understand it myself, to be totally honest. And because of this, it just appears that the universe was perfectly attuned at the very beginning for life. And the multiverse theory says, well, you don't necessarily need a God to explain this. You could explain this with multiple universes. And so in the past, and I myself have thought, well, that means, I know you're thinking, how's this going to end in Matthew? All right. It just seems like, well, clearly this is just a response to what we observe, and that's not science. Actually, it is science. And I've always thought it wasn't science. I was like, nah, this is just people who are being obstinate. Well, that's not entirely fair. It is fair that it's a response to fine-tuning. That's fair. What's not fair is to say that it's not science. And the reason why is because it's kind of how science works. It doesn't really matter what your motives are. If you have a theory that happens to be right, then it happens to be right. And there's plenty of theories that aren't. And the motives are pure. Or we'll use quotes, pure. What I mean by pure is attempt to do good science. And other times maybe it wasn't so good science. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I'm sure there were, where maybe the attempt wasn't good science, but ended up being right. Okay? It's not that outlandish. So you put your theory out there and you work with it. And your motives may not matter that much, at the end of the day. Whatever the case, what this author is saying is that we shouldn't be, in fact, his book is called Who's Afraid of the Multiverse? I'm going to push that. Very short. Really interesting so far. I'm not done yet. And he's making the case, actually, it might make an even better argument for Christianity. Because after all, when Jesus ascends, that's kind of a multiverse, right? We may just be discovering more things about what God did. Fair enough. Now, some people call this God of the gaps. Now, I've discussed this at length on my channel, so I do want to keep this brief. I'll just say I'm not impressed with God of the gaps. All God of the gaps is, if you don't know, is say whenever there's some new scientific theory, it replaces theistic explanations for things. That's just not true. With theism as a worldview, and you're allowed to say, well, maybe these new explanations better explain theism as well. Nothing wrong with that, especially given, and this is where we get to the real meat and potatoes here, okay? Especially given God's use of agency. This is one of the most important things to understand about revelation from the Bible. God uses agency. Let me give you an example of this. So in classic biblical and theological understanding, God's work was a work of creatio ex nihilo. What is that? Creation out of nothing, okay? That God created all things out of nothing. He needed no pre-materials, right? So if there's a universe and that's it, he needed no pre-materials. If there's a multiverse and that's true, he didn't need any materials to make that. Again, I'm oversimplifying some of these are some pretty complex issues, but for the sake of argument, we're going to move on. But that's not how man was made. Man was not created creatio ex nihilo, right? Man wasn't created out of nothing. Man was actually fashioned from pre-existing materials. Now, when I say pre-existing, not pre-existing to God, pre-existing to man. God made man from things he had already created. Choosing my words carefully. So, what is that? Well, there's two ways of understanding this, right? There's the scientific way of understanding it. Yeah, I mean, we're from things of the world. And so whatever that truth of that is, and those who are Christians want to get to the truth, whatever the truth of that is, whether it be some form of evolution or whatever the case, and again, for argument's sake, I'm not getting into all the views of evolution and all that. Whatever it be, let's say it turns out to be some really hardcore macroevolutionary explanation. And that turns out we prove that that's true. It's still not in conflict with the Bible. Whatever man is made of, right? We know he's made of things of the earth and of the world, right? And world means things God has created. You see what I'm saying? World is we distinguish between world and universe. Universe is a space-time continuum, right? Whereas world is all the things therein, including abstract objects, perhaps what's called particulars and universals and all these things. I'm sorry if that's a little bit over your head, but you can look those things up. They're very easy to find. And you don't need all of them to understand the point here. But so this isn't God of the gaps. It's saying, hey, I'm seeking out truth, and if my worldview can accommodate these things, then it can. And there's no reason why a believer should be. Every worldview has to do this. Every single worldview. If all you believed in was if you were a naturalist and all you believed in was the existence of matter and nothing else qualifies categorically as existing unless it possesses extension, which is to say it has a physical body, there's plenty of things that you have to make adaptations, adjustments for. What are reflections? What's a whole? You have to say what something isn't to say what a whole is, right? There's all kinds of issues that arise that you need to look at. What are spatial containers, right? I mean, a spatial container can have the color red, be cut in half, and have two different sides. And now which one is the color red, right? Is it an abstract reality that's foisted on the two objects? Or is it within the spatial container, the two objects? Well, that violates the axiom of localization. It's one object that exists at two different places at the same time. It's a little odd. How do we explain that, right? So naturalists should have the right to be able to try to explain that. Is this naturalism of the gaps? Well, no, it's just they're accommodating it with their worldview, which they should be doing, and we should commend. All right, so God uses agency. That's the second point about fashioning man from the things he created already. And so he makes man from these things. And what is that? That is God using agency. You can look at the world and go, well, it appears we came from the things animals came from and the things of the earth, and earth came from things of the universe. And it looks that way, but it could be that there's an intermediary between us and God, right? Now, if you come from a Christian background, you hear that term, intermediary between us and God, you immediately go to, soteriology and repentance and all that. I don't want you to think about it that way. The way I want you to think about it is intermediary being that God uses agency, okay? God used these things he had already made. So again, as I pointed out, Solomon said he put eternity in our hearts. We're supposed to look at these things and say, well, this isn't enough. It's pointing to something else. Now, when you go in the Old Testament, does God ever directly involve himself without an intermediary? Yes, he does. Now, here's the thing. This is so interesting. His acts sometimes can be seen by all, like the splitting of the Red Sea. But to deal with him directly was only done by a few. When Moses went and got the 10 Commandments, he presented the 10 Commandments to the people of God as an agent of God, not God directly. This is really interesting. And when a priest went into the temple or into when he entered the Holy of Holies, he did this on behalf of the people, right? So there's, again, this sort of agent. And God uses different agents. What's an angel? What's that word mean, right? It means messenger. So God uses these messengers. Sometimes God uses people. Sometimes God uses natural events. And sometimes God uses the outlandishly miraculous. Okay, so that's all. Now, here was where we get into some very important theology, okay? And I want you to really focus. This is interesting. Well, you don't have to stop what you're doing if you're just listening to this, but think about this. This makes the doctrine of the Trinity really important. Because what you get with Jesus is not an agent. Jesus is not an agent. He is God. We're told that Jesus' face is the perfect impression of God. Okay, he is God. He is 100% fully God and 100% fully man. When you look at the past in the scriptures, there's always this intermediary, always this agency. That is not the case with you. You don't want to look at Jesus and see him as someone between you and God. He is God. All right? God has now broken into history and he comes to the masses face to face. And we learn that Jesus always was, always is, and always will be. So this is very, very different and not special at all to the Jews at this time. Because they just don't believe this, right? So they don't even understand this about the Messiah. And they're really focused, and we're going to see this when the zany professor gets in here. We'll call you in here in a minute. He's going to show us that the plan, and I've discussed this in a previous video, really wasn't understood by anybody. So they just had their own ideas about the way this ought to be. And these ideas were ultimately actually satanic. And that is to say, because God kept his plan hidden from holy people as well as the satanic. All of them were kind of making some mistakes. Peter made some mistakes, right? I mean, people were making a mistake they didn't fully know. Because why? Because God needed... Jesus at one time was asked, why do you speak in riddles? Why do you do that? And he really said, if I didn't, they might believe and repent. And the mission wouldn't be accomplished. That is very consistent with the teachings of the Old Testament. God was always through history keeping this plan secret. So when Jesus did that, he was just continuing what God had always done. Solomon, if you've been following me on those, what was going on with Solomon? God was keeping his plan secret. Solomon going, this is evil, what's going on, right? I feel like it's just a funny thought. Maybe a friend of mine about a year and a half ago sent me a video of this guy who was trying to convince people not to go to prison. And he was going off on how to stay out of prison, to get your life together. And I was thinking, 90% of the people watching this aren't going to go to prison, but he was getting fired up, It was just so funny. They're not going to go to prison. Don't worry about it, But anyway, so it's like, I feel like I'm just as fired up, but I just think this is so interesting that Jesus' teachings, again, consistent with the Old Testament. So keeping this secret. So you have to go to him, right? You got to go to Jesus. And when you go to him, you go directly to God. Now that gets us to a really interesting Bible passage and a really tough Bible passage, but it's good. So let's get the zany professor in here. You come on in. Yep. All right. Oh man, just made it off the flight from Davos. All right. I like coffee too. This is Matthew. Okay. This is starting in verse 45. I wasn't going to read this part instead of starting in verse 51 because I can't pronounce some of these words, so I'm going to fake it. This is 27:45. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land. Jesus is on the cross until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, tried to fake it. But that is, they give us the translation, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is referring to the Psalms. And some of the bystanders hearing it said, this man is calling Elijah. Now listen to this. They don't understand still what is happening. What did the Pharisees say? If you're the Christ, put yourself off the cross. Right? They want to see God in power. If this is the Messiah, they expect to see power. Okay? 48. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on the reed and gave it to him to drink. Now, what is this? I'm speculating that we got to keep him alive here, right? And see what happens with Elijah. But the other said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. I mean, maybe they were trying to shut him up. I don't know, because it was sour wine. Whatever. Like I said, I'm speculating. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And this was the end of his life on the cross. So they didn't get what they wanted, and it appeared to be over, right? Okay. Well, it's far from over. Now, what we're getting ready to read, it's a lot, okay? So it's not a lot of reading, it's a lot to take in. All right, 51. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, this isn't so bad. This is easier to understand. So, as I've said, this is this elimination of agency, that you can come directly to God. So if you believe that that you're a sinner, number one, Jesus died for your sins on the cross, number two, Jesus rose from the dead and ascended and will return, you will be saved. You will now no longer need agency between you and God. There is no need for a high priest to go into a temple. Now, what happens when this curtain tears is two things. One, it's showing that God no longer needs a priest. Once you come to Jesus, you've gone to the ultimate high priest. Well, in Hebrews, you hear about Melchizedek and all that, but this is ultimately you've gone, and so now you can come directly to God yourself. And after all, he sent his son. There's no intermediary anymore, right? Even though in Timothy you see he is an intermediary, but that's a different theological situation there. You can come directly to God. But the second thing is this seems to be prophecy that the temple will be destroyed. It's both of those things. I'll have to talk sometime about how God kills two birds with one stone, so to speak, all the time. He's like a master at it. It's fascinating. It happens a lot in the Bible. All right, so this has already gone on way longer than I really suspected. I thought I'd be done with this quicker, but okay. But then it gets into some really tough stuff here. In 52, it says, but I'm going to say this real fast. The purpose of this writing was to show Jews that were considering becoming Christians, or Matthew was a Jewish Christian. He wanted to intertwine theology and history and have people look at the historical events of Jesus and understand the theology. And they think that has something to do with the ordering of these books. Well, they know this has to. I'm thinking it does. They know that it does. Matthew's here first for these reasons in the New Testament. And there's a reason why the books of the New Testament are ordered the way they are. And it's probably true of the Old Testament too, but I've never studied that in as great a detail. Here, though, Matthew is using this historical event to speak to these type of people, these Jewish Christians. And this is known as a pericope. Now, a pericope is really interesting. And if you don't know this is a pericope, this passage is really hard to read. But what it is, it means that, in essence, this is meant to be read, okay, in a particular way. And it's meant to be read as taking events that may not be temporally right now at this time and linking them with this moment in time so you get a fuller understanding. And this is not that strange in the Bible. This happens often in the Bible, especially with the prophets, okay? And you might go, oh, Travis, you're already trying to make, Zany professor, you're already trying to make justificate, or Luthanius, you're trying to make justifications for why this is a tough passage. Actually, I'm not. If you read the passage very closely, it clearly explains itself. I mean, it doesn't clearly explain itself, but you do arrive at an understanding that it is a pericope, okay? Or that it likely is a pericope. So let's go back up to 52 and really dive in here so you can see this. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Now, this appears to be after the earth shook and the rocks were split, right? Now, by the way, this area is on a fault line. Hurricanes, earthquakes still happen to this day. In fact, this has been recorded by Muslims a lot because they have property here that's destroyed all the time by tremors. So it's, again, agency, God using the things of history. So, and I have a speculation why God did it this way, right? So the tombs were opened and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Now, if you don't read carefully, you go, wow, so Jesus dies on the cross and then this happens. And I've thought that for years. That's not the case. Read closer. 53, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, who's his? Jesus, right? They went into the holy city and appeared to many. Now, so if you read it the wrong way, which is not as a pericope, but as just history alone, you end up going, oh, so this was a big event that everybody came out of the tombs, and no. We don't know how this happened. Because people have gone, well, why didn't other people write about this? It could be that Matthew and other members of the church had multiple attestations to this and said, this happened to my uncle, this happened to this person, and they went and talked to him, and he knew enough about it to go, okay, this happened. If it did, why did Matthew put it here? One commentary said, why didn't he put it in chapter 28? After the resurrection. Because it's a pericope, okay? He wants you to be able to link a future event with a contemporary event, right? Contemporary textually. So Jesus dies, and he wants you to go, hey, by the way, these saints that came out of tombs that you guys have been talking about, Here's why. Why? Because the temple curtain was torn. This means you have a way of directly accessing God, and if you're a believer, just like Jesus, you too will rise. That's it. You also will rise. And so what is he saying? This is the end times. This is the end times. These might be like the first fruits of the end times. Fascinating. I know, I'm way off. Anyway, that's a little joke. Go through my comment sections on a couple of my videos. But, all right. But actually, I'm way on. Maybe. You want to have some humility when you approach, especially passages like this. But I want to say this. I have a little bit of speculation about this. So these people are rising, right? They're rising from the dead. And here's my speculation. Not long after this, the tomb of Jesus is secure, right? And that stone is rolled away. This is the big epiphany. This is the big event. So if earthquakes are common in this area, then maybe what happened here is earthquakes are common, no big deal. So God has the sun go out. Gets dark, could indicate a storm of some kind, or it could be that this was a supernatural darkness. After all, the centurions after this, the centurion says, "This is the Son of God." Or he says that this is, he believes. Maybe the first person in history to believe and understand. But so it goes dark. There's earthquakes, which are fairly common. So when these saints, after the resurrection of Jesus, rise, there isn't like a big event that heralds the resurrection other than the resurrection of Jesus. So that way, God has secured that when the stone is rolled away, we understand there is an empty tomb, and that's the tomb that matters. Yes, it matters that their bodies were risen, but if you are a believer, the resurrection you care about is Jesus. And why? Because of agency. And I'll finish with this. Moses comes down off the mountain, offers the 10 Commandments. They're destroyed, goes back up the mountain. God does it again, offers another 10 Commandments. There's all these other things that happen with agency. It could get to the point where someone can say, you're always trusting what these other people are saying about God. Now, you may struggle with that. But in the New Testament, now you got to deal with God. Because Jesus is God. And he broke into history, and we deal with him directly. He also changes because of the direct interaction we have with Jesus, how we understand the Old Testament. Final point, I'm always going to say this. Don't let people tell you that the Old Testament God is not the New Testament God. You can't understand Jesus without the Old Testament. You can't do it. You're going to have a really bad idea about Jesus. And I thought I'd name the video this. I'm not sure if I will. Good theology will change your life, and bad theology will too. And if you want good theology, you're best to understand the Old Testament along with the New. And if you want bad theology, just ignore the Old Testament. There's all kinds. You can get to a saving knowledge of Jesus. I do believe that. But at some point, you will submit and believe that the God of the Old, especially if you study the Bible and actually do study it, and really say, okay, I'm gonna try to understand it and not let my own prejudices get in the way. You'll see that the God of the Old Testament is the God new. Just thought I'd tape that on there at the end. All right, we're getting a 30-minute mark. I think this can go 36, but I think I've made my piece. I hope this was a good, entertaining 30 minutes. And if you didn't understand some of this, take my advice from an earlier video. Rewatch it. Re-listen. You actually can understand more than you think. There's some stuff going on here that, and maybe take the time to actually look up some of this stuff, and see it's out there. It is some really interesting stuff. Be blessed today. Have a good one.